Hi, I'm Boris Blade. I'm the host of Strange But Harmless. We're going to talk about family TV events. Now, there were certain family TV events in our house. The first that comes to mind is The Wizard of Oz. When this movie came on, we all gathered around the living room and watched it together. It was on at least once a year, usually at Christmas or New Year's. It didn't matter how many times we saw it, it felt like the first time for us kids. As a small child, the flying monkeys scared the bejeebies out of me. I could handle the witches and the monkey guards, but those flying monkeys got me every time. I felt sorry for the Scarecrow and Cowardly Lion, but the Tin Man deserved whatever he got. At least I thought so. I kept wishing they ran out of oil. The next biggie would be the Olympics. We may not have got to watch every event due to church obligations, but other than that, we always watched them together. Mom's favorite events were figure skating and then gymnastics. Dad liked the skiing events and the luge racers. Us kids didn't care as long as we got to stay up late. Of course, back then you were limited to the number of channels to watch, 3 networks and a few UHF channels. Then again, more than one network was showing the Olympics. We had it pretty good. Dad was the first in our neighborhood to get cable TV. In fact, the cable company had to run lines into our allotment just for us. There were none going there prior to our house getting cable. Even with the additional channels that gave us, we still watched the Olympics. Then there were the musicals. I don't mean musicals as in movies with singing and dancing. I mean musicals as in Broadway plays adapted for movies. Mom's favorite was Oklahoma. Dad favored South Pacific. Us kids only liked them because it meant we got to stay up late. Those who could stay awake, that is. They were fun to watch, what with all the dancing. Elvis Presley movies were also considered special in our house. Mom and Dad both liked them a lot, especially the newer ones in color. I like the older black and white ones better myself, mostly as military movies, although Viva Las Vegas and Blue Hawaii were really good. I remember Fat Elvis doing a farewell concert tour on TV. It was sad to see what a great entertainer ended up being. I have no respect for the man due to his lifestyle and sexual proclivities, but as stated, he was a great entertainer. A lousy role model, but great entertainer. Then again, he never signed up to be a role model, did he? I also find it sad that he lived a reclusive life for years. It reminds me of Howard Hughes when I think on it. Sad, real sad. Also, Jerry Lewis movies were watched a lot, especially the ones with Dean Martin. They played off each other well, with Dean Martin playing the straight man. Jerry Lewis was one of the best physical comedians ever, in my humble opinion. Their stand-up comedy routines were outrageously funny for the times. Of course, the Jerry Lewis Telethon was an event in our house. All kids could stay up as late as we wanted, and the fall asleep and it's off to bed you go rule didn't apply. We could cuddle up in a blanket on the floor, take a nap, and get up for more telethon. I also remember rushing home from church on Wednesday night to watch the Red Skelton Show. My dad loved that show. I became a big fan also. His characters were hilarious, Clem Cadiddlehopper being mine and Dad's favorite. He loved All in the Family, too. That is until the first time Archie Bunker said damn. Have I mentioned that my dad was a fanatical Christian? From that day forward until the day he died, All in the Family was not allowed on in our house. Now, football in our house was another story. I can't remember my dad being a fan, but my oldest brother was a die-hard Browns fan. I do remember my dad seemed to take enjoyment out of rubbing it in every time the Browns screwed up. I carried on that tradition after Dad died. You're welcome, Dad. And boy, I could get my brother red in the face just by quietly laughing whenever the Browns missed a pass or a field goal. Another family favorite was Hee Haw. Mom and Dad both loved that show. I vaguely remember watching Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Oh, also, Love American Style was really funny. Benny Hill, all the different versions of Lucille Ball Show, both variety and sitcom. The Carol Burnett Show was loved by all in our family. It was Mom's favorite variety show. Let's not forget Gilligan's Island, I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched, and Gomer Pyle. Evenings had cartoons also. My dad loved the Flintstones and the Jetsons, even though the old Flintstone show had Winston Cigarette as a sponsor. They ran ads with Fred and Barney smoking, sometimes hiding from Wilma and Betty. Google them. They're hilarious. You should Google old commercials from the 50s through 70s. You won't believe some of the stuff they got away with. At one point in TV history, cigarette companies ran ads claiming that so many out of so many doctors recommended smoking. We can't forget Fantasy Island or The Love Boat, two more of Dad's favorites. And what Saturday afternoon would be complete without Rat Patrol, Combat, and the other war shows from that period? But I think my dad's all-time favorite show in the world was Hogan's Heroes. I remember as a teenager sitting up until 1 or 2 a.m. at the card table with Dad. We'd be playing double solitaire in front of the TV while watching Hogan Heroes late night reruns. Dad always kicked my ass. I used to think he made up the rules as he went along. Any time I made a mistake, he told me, pick a card and lose your turn. Maybe someday I'll tell you how I saved Bob Crane's life. He was the guy who played Colonel Hogan. Yeah, it was for real. My dad was with me then also. Those are some of my fondest memories of my dad. For all outward appearances, it would have looked as if my dad didn't care much for his third son. But Dad shared a lot of his innermost thoughts and secrets with me. He started teaching me the basics of driving at about 4 years old. I was the only one who he told where his change stash was, and I had permission to raid it occasionally for the ice cream truck. My siblings never did figure out how I had money for ice cream at least once a week, when it was common knowledge that most weeks I spent my allowance on a half-gallon of ice cream and a bottle of chocolate syrup. I would put it all in one of Mom's big mixing bowls, plant myself in front of the cartoon-infested TV, and scarf it until my hands were freezing. I'd stick it, spoon and all, in the freezer and come back later for more. I would do that until it was gone. Most weeks it didn't last till Saturday evening. If Dad wasn't home on Saturday afternoon, then the war shows went out the window. There was a show called Superhost. It played old horror movies and the like. The host was dressed as a sloppy version of Superman. It was dumb, but funny dumb. He did skits and other stuff. Friday nights were also special. Us kids got to stay up and watch the late night movie. At first it was Ghoulardi hosting a show with skits and stuff. Then his imposter, the Ghoul, took over. Then later in life it was Houlihan and Big Chuck, which later gave way to the Big Chuck and Little John show. I always referred to them as the Big Chuck and Little Fuck show, at least when Mom and Dad wasn't within earshot. Of course, these were local shows, but I'm sure they had similar shows in your area. We watched some game shows too. The Price is Right was watched, as was Password. In the evening, Match Game was on. That was one of the funniest shows on TV, in my humble opinion. For a while, when I would come home from school, I'd watch Speed Racer and Tobor the Ape Man. They were on back to back. I also watched Ultraman. I loved that show as a kid. Believe it or not, I turned out to be a consummate binge watcher. At one time, prior to Netflix, their mail order movies, DVRs, or streaming, I ran 6 VCRs nightly, recording shows plus watching my favorite ones live. I spent all weekend catching up on my shows. Now it's your turn to share. I know I did list all the good shows. What was your favorite as a child? What was your parents' favorite shows? Where was your favorite place to watch? Favorite TV snack? Drop a line in the comments. So when I was wrapping this up, I was looking around my files and I came across this. Seemed like a really good add-on. It's not too long, so I'm going to throw it in here. Football in our house was a controversial subject. My oldest brother was Dad's antagonist. People said he was his favorite, but it was more like him and Dad were sparring partners, especially over the Browns. My brother sat locked in, shushing anyone who dared talk during the game. Dad waited for every mistake to needle him, aggressively, sometimes passive-aggressively. It was a sport within a sport. I think Dad made us watch just so he could screw with him. After Dad's untimely demise at 56, I carried on the tradition. I made sure the game was on and ripped into the Browns every chance I got, mostly to torture my brother. Even when they scored, I'd say, "Don't worry, it'll get called back." And when they did mess up, I'd pile on even harder. Only an idiot would be a Browns fan. I always knew you were dense, but an idiot? That's new. Watching his face go red was half the fun. Well, that's the end of this episode. So just keep in mind, I'm Boris Blade, and as always I am strange but harmless.